Do you think, since you were talking about like the vibrations of the past in the space, do you feel like your mother also felt the same types of like scarcity or isolation, but from a different lens than you?
That's a very interesting
Mm.
question that I actually have
Mm-hmm.
not processed. And I
Okay.
haven't thought about that. I think what I will say is that as I've gotten older, and it's been like this for my mother and other family members, I've been a lot more cognizant of trying to develop a relationship with the person outside of the role.
Yes.
And so at the
Okay.
moment,
Okay.
I know I can't give like a sound answer to that because I know that that's something that I would learn more of
Yeah.
as that relationship with her develops.
Right.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
That was a
All
great
right.
answer, though. It was a lovely answer. A relationship, building a relationship outside of the role. That's
Yeah.
that's pretty awesome.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the fourth season of In the Telling, a global Black family podcast. I'm Miranda, and I'm joined by my wonderful, wonderful co-host, Stephen Fullwood, and we are the founders of the Nomadic Archivist Project. In this season of In the Telling, we are talking to Black, trans, and gender nonconforming folks nationally and internationally about their family stories, biological or chosen.
Our guest today is Tyler Andrew Six Nelson, a New York-based photographer and visual artist of Black trans experience. Addressing the intersections of Blackness, queerness, and transness, their work, primarily by way of stage self-portraiture, explores themes of belonging, safety, and isolation. Incorporating found artifacts and childhood photos, Six reflects on who feels secure in shared spaces and who's excluded. They also examine how the need for and intention of safe spaces evolve, autonomously adapting to those who inhabit them. Their practice is deeply personal, drawing from lived experience to investigate the complexities of identity and loss. Through major transitions within the family home, self-identity becomes a crucial anchor, offering both stability and catharsis. By blending personal narrative with broader cultural inquiries, Six's work challenges the perception of security and displacement, questioning what it truly means to belong in a world where safety is often conditional. I want to welcome you to the podcast, Six. Welcome to In the
Oh,
Telling.
oh my. That was it's interesting to write it. It's different than to hear someone else say it all out loud. Hello.
Oh,
Thank you. Thank you both, Stephen and Miranda, for having me.
Yeah, it's
awesome.
Excited.
great to have you on the show. So a way to just get started to kind of like ground the conversation, if you
Mm-hmm.
could, just give us a little bit about who you are, how you identify,
Mhm.
where you've
Mm-hmm.
come from or you grew up, anything to just sort of give us a sense of who Six is.
Yeah, most definitely. So, hello everybody. I
Mm-hmm.
am Tyler or Six. Either is fine. Typically, I say that to people, just don't mess my pronouns up. I am I'm a born and raised New Yorker. Kind of split between Harlem and East New York.
Oh, okay.
As Stephen mentioned, even though that's just also my statement, I'm a visual artist and photographer that primarily at the moment works with self-portraiture, and kind of examining intersectionality of queerness, of blackness, of transness, but particularly at the moment, how that translates in the family home and kind of the
Mm.
ways in which the physical structure of the home kind of takes on this autonomous role over time to where it evolves in a way that's almost symbiotic to how the person residing in it evolves.
Okay.
Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah,
I'm curious to know exactly what you mean with the physical structure
yeah.
evolving.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that I grew up with hearing from my mom was always once you leave this house or once you walk out that door, I can't protect you anymore.
Okay.
And a lot of the work that I've made photographically is often like of people in the community. So a lot of gender expansive, a lot of queer people.
Mm-hmm.
And so typically what's happened over the course of the last couple of years, along with just it at times being economically more sound to shoot from
Mm-hmm.
home and do self-portraits, I primarily shoot from the place that I live in now, which is like the family apartment or the family home, and that's also where I've grown up.
Okay.
And so I've tended to notice as I have gotten older, because we're a big age of 30, but a small age for other
Ooh,
people. Um,
like me.
I I've noticed that the things that I require of space and the things that I need to feel safe within myself takes different shapes and has a different
Mm-hmm.
intentionality from what my mother would need to
Okay.
house and take care of
Mm-hmm.
2 to 3 kids.
Right.
Like
Okay.
Okay.
so, and it's really funny. There was an interesting moment some years ago um, where my mother had taken some old light fixtures that she had had on the walls for years out
Mm-hmm.
and replaced them with like kind of stand-ins. And I noticed over time that there was this kind of shape, this leftover shape of a previous paint job that was there. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that I've kind of noticed as I've grown up in that space, even when I've left and then come back, is that I always think of the remnants of what was there previously. And
Mm-hmm.
so there was something about seeing this old square behind a light fixture, of thinking of that being a part of an apartment that existed for
Mm-hmm.
the same
Mm-hmm.
people, but they
Mm-hmm.
existed in different ways. So
Right.
I started
Yeah.
to just look at my actual home as a space that does evolve and take
Right.
that has different forms of itself as the people residing in
Mm-hmm.
it change. And so when I think of it
Right.
versus what it could have been or what it was for my mother when it was me, myself, and then my siblings versus where it's more now myself and my older sibling, I think of
Mm-hmm.
what is required of that space. I think of what are the things that would make me feel sound and secure in a way that's different from my 6-year-old self, but then also thinking
Mm-hmm.
about it
Okay.
from the aspect of understanding that safety takes different shapes. So it's not just something that's physical, it's something that's what's going to make me feel mentally sound, what's going to make me feel emotionally
Mm-hmm.
sound,
Mm-hmm.
what are those things. And so when I noticed those like kind of changes or the things that were left behind from previous, I guess, renditions of this family home, that was something that was really
Mm-hmm.
interesting to me, and that kind of just I started to stick with as I was making specifically self-portraiture.
Okay. And how do you go about finding those answers for both you yourself? I'm guessing you're thinking about safety for yourself and your sibling.
So it's an interesting thing because my brother is like a cis straight black man.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
clear cut. It's not clear cut, of course, because it's not just that flat. But I
Right.
think that on the
Right.
basis, it's that. And then for me, I'm genderqueer or gender expansive, um, visual artist, career visual artist
Mm-hmm.
at that. And so
Mm-hmm.
being of a trans experience, being of a queer experience, like those are what I need to feel safe,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
look and sound a little bit differently from what could that potentially look like. And I think for me over time, it's been one of those things where I don't know, I've been able to examine it through what's in my head at the time, what's in my heart at the time, what's going on the
Mm-hmm.
outside world. When I think about isolation, I think about that in relation to, because I live so like farther out in Brooklyn, And it's been like this my entire life. Even though I enjoy to a certain degree that kind of disconnect from the outside world, it can be really isolating when it comes to wanting to fellowship and just connect with people in the actual community that are more in my intersectional community. And so things of like that isolation, or even when I think about ideas of safety in relation to what's at stake in relation to my transness, I think of like a lack of housing. I think of emotional instability where that comes, or emotional scarcity in relation to like how I'm received and perceived by more my blood relatives than my chosen family, my chosen community.
Mm-hmm. Do you think, since you were talking about like the vibrations of the past in the space, do you feel like your mother also felt the same types of like scarcity or isolation, but from a different lens than you?
That's a very interesting question that I actually have not processed. And I haven't thought about that. I think what I will say is that as I've gotten older, and it's been like this for my mother and other family members, I've been a lot more cognizant of trying to develop a relationship with the person outside of the role.
Yes.
And so at the moment, I know I can't give like a sound answer to that, because I know that that's something that I would learn more of as that relationship with her develops.
Right.
Okay. That was a
All
great
right.
answer, though. It's a lovely answer. A relationship, building a relationship outside of the role. That's pretty awesome.
I mean, because it's been like that. Like I've been able to do that with my grandmother, who is still physically present. I've been able to do that to a degree with like my other grandmother, who isn't physically like with us anymore, but still kind of seeing tidbits that come about as I get older that add to the thread of like her humanity, outside of just knowing her as, oh, this is my nana. Like, and it still is, but there are all of these different kind of things and through lines that I find that connect me to her or me to my mother, which I like greatly appreciate.
So one of the questions I had for you, Six, was really about, it's really about identity. It's this idea, you described yourself as a transgender expansive person. And you've alluded to some of this in your earlier commentary around that's things being static or fixed. And so can you talk about what that means to you, and how did you come up with that description?
It was definitely a process for me to actually identifying as trans. I think that gender expansive, being non-binary, I don't want to say it was easier for me to process my gender expansiveness and my transness, but I do think that, no, I will say to a degree it was. And I think it's because once you name a thing, it now exists in the world. And so now when you name this thing and now you acknowledge that you exist in the world like this, you're also acknowledging all of the things that come with it, both the good and the different and the terrible.
It's powerful.
I think for me, gender expansive also was a phrasing that I started to use for myself more, because I can cognitively identify that there is a plethora of gender identities. And so there were moments and are moments where, even though I know I don't identify as cis, I know that there are like these nuances between genderqueer, between non-binary. There are these things that exist. And so there have been like experiences where I'm just like, gender expansive feels not safe, but it feels more sound. And it wasn't until probably the last month or so that I started to apply not just being gender expansive, but identifying that being gender expansive is still under the umbrella of transness. And that and I do identify as trans.
It feels like queerness feels like it's a space, if you decide that you're still allowing yourself to explore and be large within yourself, then because there are different ways that people go. Some people identify as cis or go from one gender to another, and others who are more, well, not more, because I don't want to judge it. I want it to be equal. People decide based on how they experience the world. And when I heard the term gender expansive, I was like, something about that felt so great, because it just leaves you, there's a space of wonder, right?
Mm-hmm.
And context, and how one might identify differently, from space to space or in several years or whatever. So thank you for giving us that definition.
Yeah. And then I think, and honestly, it was one of those, it's really interesting because it wasn't something that I had seen. Like I had seen like a slew of other terms. I'd seen, like I said, genderqueer. I'd seen non-binary. I'd seen multiple terminologies to work with. But when I set on gender expansive, it felt like it explained how I see myself in a better capacity, because I do want to acknowledge that I'm not necessarily going between the binaries of from one to the other. I don't necessarily identify with that, but I also know that I don't necessarily identify, not even necessarily, I don't identify as a man. And I also know that I don't identify necessarily as a woman, but I do know that I exist more on the spectrum that is softer or more feminine leaning, that exists for me emotionally and mentally, and just how I move through space and physically outside of just a feminine, queer, or gay man.
Right.
Thank you.
It seems like a lot of the things that you kind of focus on, I don't know whether I'm guessing in your daily life, but also in your artistic practice, is really looking at and thinking about like this sense of belonging or identifying, and also this sense of safety. Is this something that, goes back like in time from like when you were growing up, or like your family structure, or what you know of, your ancestry? I mean, like where does this come from, and how is it continuously influencing you or evolving?
So when you ask that question, I do think specifically like the notion of safety, and I think about that in relation to going back to what my mother was saying about once you leave this house, I can't protect you.
Yeah.
But then I was also thinking about the things that existed or that I had experienced in that house, or even just the things that I've experienced outside of that house that have shaped how I look at safety and how I look at relational safety. And so even as far back as like when I was a baby queer, but at the time baby gay, just at that time, like a lot of some of my peers identifying as bisexual at the time, because I felt like it was easier and safer to still give my parents that kind of like that sparkle of hope, where they would still have some semblance of like the child that they raised. So I think about things like that. I also think about experiencing like sexual violence when I was a child, and what that was like, and just how both of my parents kind of responded to it. Not negatively, period, but and just like those responses. And then I also like think about kind of the fears and the responses that came with when I was like an adolescent and getting caught with having like gay porn on my laptop, or like the family laptop, and then there being viruses, and then there being like all of those things, where I'm thinking about the scarcity and like the fear mindset that came with all of those things of being discovered of being discovered, and as if it was something that was wrong when we know, and I know that it's not. And so that's been something that typically will translate through how I position myself and how I stage myself in my portraiture. Because now I look at it from a perspective of making images of where I'm allowing myself self-preservation. And I personally detest the idea of coming out. I don't think I have to come out to you.
Okay.
It's like, it's not like this. I'm not trying to have this big coming out party. I'm not trying to do all of this because at the end of the day, yes, this is a part of my identity, but this isn't all of me. And it's one of those things where I would rather kind of monitor the rate at which I allow people into me versus me making this declaration of, okay, here I am. Now you have to like take me in as I am, which you still should. And I know that it's going to take time. It comes with processing, especially if you have your own perceptions or intentions behind the type of person that you expected me to be or become.
Okay.
And still, this is who I am. This is how I am. This is how I identify. This is how I exist and take up space in the world. I take up space in the world.
Right.
So it's
As
really one of those things where, for me, it's about allowing people into that.
Okay.
So are these things, do you reflect on this now with your family as well, or is this sort of like your individual journey?
It's a bit of both.
Okay.
It's been a conversation with my mother where I've like had conversation with her about identifying as non-binary. And still, even in that, I have those moments where I'm like, I think that she has heard it. And I'm not all the way sure if she has retained what comes with someone that identifies as non-binary. Because then I'm just like, do you then not correlate with that means that you have a child that's trans? Like, do you correlate it as this is a lifestyle and not just how your child identifies and how they exist in the world? Like, do you think that this is just a choice? Because I don't think I would choose to be a straight man. I wouldn't choose that. But this is how I exist. And so, yeah, there are moments where I'm like, I think you get it. And sometimes there are a lot of moments where there are kind of like those glimmers of hope where even if she's like, when she's texting me or like saying happy birthday or saying happy holidays and sending those like well wishes, I've noticed that she's stopped using man or using boy or using he, and I'll like pick up very subtly when it just says person.
Yeah.
And that is something that on like a couple of occasions I've called that out, and I was like, thank you for doing that. And so I think that has played a role to some degree in connecting with the humanness of my mother outside of the role. And so it's just been easier with her. Yeah. Thank you. And like it's become easier with her just because growing up I was just always closer to my mother.
Okay.
Speaking of family and transitions, in our pre-interview, we talked about how there were transitions in the home, and in navigating those moments, how has it shaped your idea around family and even your own identity? You've talked a little bit about this already, but I thought I kind of wanted to hone in on a little bit more in terms of like what Miranda said, how have you been navigating these spaces, identity spaces with yourself as opposed to your relatives, but the major transitions in your family, can you talk a little bit about those and then talk about how they've affected you and how you understand family and how you understand yourself?
Yeah. So I think for me, it's kind of just the kind of the relational dynamic, discussions of like moving out of the family home and kind of what that would look like to leave it to just my brother and I, which already we didn't necessarily have the closest dynamic, just growing up in general. And as an adult, it hasn't been that different. And so there's been a lot of kind of back and forth, between our relationship. And even though I've also had the conversation with him about how I identify, it's a different narrative, not a different narrative, but it's been a little, it's been, it has played a part in how I look at safe space, specifically in the emotional sense, because there tends to be like a lot of strife. Like we don't really speak to each other, and when we do, there's like a bumping of heads. And like one of the last arguments we had gotten into a couple months ago had really kind of just confirmed that I was also trying to exist in a space that was still accommodating more to him in certain ways than myself.
Yeah.
And not even just my gender expression, but just in terms of taking up space. And so that was something that had become really hard, like so much so like I still don't speak to my brother for the most part, like unless we have to, and unless it has something to do with like the home, we don't.
Okay.
And that has also been something. I remember I was having a conversation with my therapist a couple months ago where she was asking me how that made me feel. And it was interesting because I hadn't processed how that actually made me feel, because I was also experiencing like being back in a school setting and just experiencing that, and then work, and then like family stuff. And I was like, when she asked how I felt about it, I was like, it's actually really tiring to kind of regularly have to remind myself more than anybody else that taking up space in a place that I grew up in matters just as much as him being able to take up space. So yeah.
What have you done for yourself, or what have you found to like sort of be an alternative to like your blood relatives?
I mean, I have I have family, I have kinship, I have like fellowship with people that I've met for just as long as like I've known Steven, which is at this point almost a decade.
This is wow. Has it been that long?
Yeah.
Wow.
And like some
That's
of those
awesome.
people I met through Steven. So it's an interesting thing for me, because these are people that have seen me exist in multiple ways, both like in trying to understand taking up space just as a person, understanding myself as far as not as much my queerness, because for the most part all of my close community are people that are gay or queer, but more like the development of better understanding and unpacking my gender identity. And so those have been the people that have really not kept me in check, but I've been able to like check in with, and that have also been able to call me in when there were times that I needed to be called in. And then it also helps that all of my close friends are artists. So they're also very malleable to a degree in not how they exist as much, but more how they acknowledge existence.
Okay.
I get that. Yeah. Yeah. And keeping with chosen family, how has your chosen family, collectively, individually, offered you space to unpack who you are, who you want to be, who you're exploring? I know that your friends are close, and I know that, they mean a lot to you, and they love you as well. So, yeah.
Think so. It's interesting because the closeness also ties into a lack of closeness and like kind of the feelings of isolation, because I want to say the majority of that close knit, a lot of them, or at least maybe a third of them, don't live in New York City anymore. So like
Okay.
one of my closest friends, Jamie, she lived in New York for some time, and she
Mm-hmm.
moved to pursue a doctorate in at U Chicago. I want to say
Mm-hmm.
in 2023, like mid 2023. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's someone that I speak to almost regularly, because as as a Black trans woman, she was one of the first iterations that gave me kind of a heads up, where she was like, sister, I'm letting you know it's beautiful, this process that you are moving through, and your gender identity. I also do want to let you know that it can be lonely. I
Mm-hmm.
also want to let you
Mm-hmm.
know that like I am still here for you. Like kind of
Mm.
things like that. And then it also
Mm-hmm.
has
Mm-hmm.
trickled into me as an artist, because she's also like an arts theorist and arts writer. So like it's been one of
Okay.
those things where she's always given me space to say,
Mm-hmm.
yes, this is good, but also ask yourself why. Like even as far as my
Okay.
work, she's been like, okay, yes, this is a pretty image, but what about work that exists outside of it just being a pretty image? Like
Yeah.
like an image, a photograph can be pretty. There are
Mm-hmm.
some images that are just pretty images, but she's
Mm-hmm.
allowed me the space, or granted me the space rather, to question the context more of what I make. And then there are
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
also friends like Blue Mood or Jamel, who I
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
yeah, and like one of those friends that I've met through Steven, where it's like they do the same thing. And Jamel also, when we first met, lived in New York City with
Mm-hmm.
a partner. And that was also an interesting kind of relationship, because when I first met Jamel, it was at what I used to call Steven's Gatherings. Um, And so it was one of those things where this was like, it was my earliest like iterations of also experiencing nightlife and going out to places like Trappy
Mm.
Hour, or like, and so because
Mm-hmm.
at the time Jamel lived in Crown Heights, we were able to kind of buddy up and know that, okay, yeah, we're gonna go out after this, but then we're also going to, like, when we leave, we're on the same train, so it's like we're kind of
Yeah.
watching each other. And then there would be those
Uh-huh.
moments where throughout that friendship, just like Stephen would have his gatherings, Jamel and their partner Lee would also have like functions that always
Mm-hmm.
just felt like a massing of people in the community. And so it's been one of those things
Mm-hmm.
where it's like experiencing that in my early 20s, and then going into
Mm-hmm.
now being 30. It's a very interesting process, and it's something that I'm really grateful for, because it really shows me kind of all of these
Mm-hmm.
arms that kind of stretch out, in the sense of like that familial networking of like, oh wow, when I like sit back and I think of, oh well, how do I know this person? Or like, where did I meet this person? And often
Mm-hmm.
it ties first. It's a tie between like meeting them through Blue, or meeting them through Steven. And so that's been
Mm-hmm.
something that's interesting process to me. Or like I have, and like now they live in, I think, South Carolina or North Carolina, one of the two. They live in the
I think
Carolinas,
it's North Carolina. Yeah. I think it's
right?
North Carolina. I think Raleigh or
Um,
something. Yeah.
and then yes, and then another close friend of mine, Maury Hitchcock, who is a collagist and like they're an art writer as well. They've been someone that they live in Chester, Pennsylvania. And so they're someone that we're always in fellowship with. We're always laughing over the phone. We're always having conversations of like what it's like to deal with men, like especially being two people of trans experience, like getting an idea of what that feels like or what that experience comes with. I met Maya at a group showing some years ago. I want to say maybe like 2017. And then I met Shay in 2018. The math may be off for Maya because I might have known her longer. But like they have become like two of my like closest people in this world. Like growing up, because of how far I live, I didn't experience having friends over like that. So it's like it's not like I had friends that my mother knew or that like she was like always seeing. And like to this day, Shay is one of those people that's like the honorary sibling that has a relationship outside of me with my mother. Like they regularly text. Like I don't have to say, oh, you know, say happy birthday to Shay when this is birthday. I'll just like, he'll just tell me randomly, oh yeah, you know, she texted me. Or like we were talking. Like, and so it's one of those things where it feels like it's a refreshing dynamic because there are moments that I have with the community that I have now where there are things that I'm experiencing that I didn't get when I was younger. Or like that sense of community and like friendship and kinship or like fellowship that I'm experiencing now as an adult or have been experiencing throughout my adulthood that feels very affirming for like my younger self.
Right.
This is beautiful.
That's great.
Gosh.
That's very nice.
Where do you go from that statement? That's just so beautiful. And wanted it to stand and like just be, you know, just, yeah. Yes.
I love that you mentioned that Stephen's parties are for Stephen's gatherings. What did you call it? Gatherings? Yeah.
Gatherings.
Gatherings.
And just like so that's where like that's even with Jermel and Steven, I've met you a couple times, Miranda.
I was about to ask if we have met. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So like you, I've met Ajamu, I've met Christopher, I've met Jermel, I've met Fatima Jamal. Like I've met so many people. I've met Akima Zayn. Like I've met so many people that still exist in my life today, whether they're close or they're just like those people that you see in shared space that you're always going to see, you're always going to love on, you're always going to acknowledge when they're doing something great, or you're always going to reach out when you can. And so it becomes it becomes a family tree. It becomes
yeah, because you have those distant aunts or uncles, you know, but they're there. You can still reach out to them if you don't talk to them every day.
That you don't always see, but when you do see them, you know you're gonna go on those walks.
Right.
The walk,
right?
Like the walks,
yeah.
Like so.
Yes, it's
awesome.
good to hear that you've been affirmed in that way. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
You know. Yes.
So anything that you, as we wrap up, anything that you want to sort of like leave us with or our listeners with? Any final thoughts?
Existing is not linear. Showing up isn't easy, even when you want to show up for yourself. Putting yourself first is not easy, not for everybody. I know for me, it's not. And I've had to learn that putting myself first or acknowledging that I just have every right to take up space can and will look selfish. And, you have to be okay with that. And that's for anybody. You have to be okay with it looking selfish to some degree, but also to the people that matter the most and that value you the most. They're not necessarily going to look at it as you being selfish. They're gonna, or not in the, not in like the in a derogatory like manner of speaking. Like these are, you have to do these things to exist. Exactly. And especially to exist fully and authentically.
I think you're right. I mean, it is a journey for most of us to put ourselves first. But, you know, a lot of the times when we are selfish, you know, we can take, when we're taking better care of ourselves, we can show up for people.
Exactly.
We could show up for people that we couldn't do before.
And I've had like multiple, actually, Jamel said that to me over the phone recently, like probably 2 days ago. Just like, you have to be able, you can't show up the way that you want to for the people that matter to you and for the community that matters to you if you aren't putting yourself first and prioritizing yourself above all else, because you can't pour from an empty cup. Like I've tried to do it. It doesn't work.
Oh, there's that part of it where you're showing people that you're living, you're taking care of yourself, and that you're still in community. You're still loving people. You're still extending yourself.
Like that. I'm going to leave with that one.
Well, it was great speaking with you today,
Thank
Tyler. We appreciate you so much for coming on the show and
so much
for sharing yourself with us and being so open and vulnerable. It's really, really appreciated. So thank you.
Your clarity is amazing and inspiring and just beautiful.
I was like, oh, I've never done a podcast before, so this is new frontier. But I appreciate the both of you and this opportunity, and I had a really good time.